Welcome to another United States history lecture with Dr. King on. This time we're going to look at life in tenement houses. This is the target 5.2 on your target sheet for this unit. Let's take a look at what the poor and the migrants who lived in urban areas faced in the 19th and early 20th centuries. What the heck is a tenement? It's just an apartment building for lots of poor folks. It's not a particularly well-built apartment building, has lots of problems usually. I'm going to show you plenty of pictures of what these tenements look like. It didn't have to be that way, but this is the association you see in the 19th century. That these are really awful, disgusting, and gross and dangerous places for urban poor folks to live in. They tend to be densely crowded. They tend to be part of ethnic neighborhoods. So you'll see a series of tenements that might be all the Italian section or the Greek section. Columbus could have been like that. We've got an Italian village. It just wasn't a tenement district. We've got a German village. We've got a Hungarian village. So we have ethnic neighborhoods. We just never had the tenement district like you would see in New York. And the housing that we did have that was like this has since been destroyed. So it existed in downtown Columbus, was torn down to make way for 670, which runs through the city. And then a section was destroyed by the building of Interstate 71. These tenement houses were dirty, poor sanitation. They were dangerous. Fires could break out and kill many people. And they were dark. Many of these were built in places where the city grew so fast that the city couldn't keep up with sanitation and other services. 19th century cities very often were flooded with people seeking opportunity, and the city could not grow quickly enough to accommodate them and provide adequate housing, provide adequate sanitation. Sometimes the cities just didn't care, and they left it up to private companies to provide these things with pretty disastrous results. So we're going to take a look at some of the nastiness of these places, which became breeding grounds for disease and crime. This is a tenement toilet. Yeah, bet you certainly don't want to go to the bathroom there. Here is the inside of a tenement. Notice how crowded it is with things. And the kids here sharing a space, mom, eating and sleeping all in the same room is not uncommon. Here, these kids are sleeping out on a balcony, probably because it's crowded inside, but also likely because it's cooler outside. Um, it's hard to tell how many kids are out here, but it looks like at least 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 are out here, maybe even 6. The sweetest part of this photo to me is the fact that she's clutching a kitten as she's gone to sleep. Here's another image showing people bunking up together in tight space. I don't know exactly how many people are here. Could be up to 4, perhaps. Looks like 1, 2, 3 at least. Everything in the tenement is used, so there's no like room to spread around. You got what looks like a stove here, and there are eating utensils here, stuff packed up everywhere. Tenements could be designed well, but many of them were built poorly. Reformers at the time advocated the building of what was called the dumbbell tenement. You can see it looks like a dumbbell, um, sort of comes in at the middle. And the idea was you'd put an air shaft in it, air would circulate, and it would, prevent disease. In the 19th century, there was a belief that disease traveled in the air. Um, and so this would be a way of preventing people from getting sick. It turned out that this didn't work in exactly the way that they thought it would. And the bottoms of these air shafts became dirty and nasty, full of water. So much for their ingenuity. Notice here, it's a public hallway with bedrooms, living room, parlor, no separate kitchen, and a water closet, we call that a toilet, for everybody to share on the floor. Here's one of those air shafts. You can see the boys, kids up on the roof playing around. Hopefully they're being safe, but sometimes they're not. Sometimes people fall in here, and the bottoms of these shafts could be full of all kinds of debris. Another inside portrait, family all living together in the same space, sharing the bedding that they've got, clothing, having to eat, and do all of their daily activities together. And that would include cooking. The look on this poor woman's face, I think she's just flat out exhausted caring for kids. Everything everywhere. A lot of cities didn't have rules for how you could build buildings. And so these tenements often popped up very much haphazardly, however they could fit in, sometimes built in crazy corners to each other, creating these dark alleyways where very little sunlight got in, creating places where it was easy for crime to happen. And as I indicated earlier, Columbus did have sections of town like this. They weren't necessarily full of tenements so much as like really, really, really poorly built shacks that eventually Columbus tore down to build interstates and to clean up the waterfront. People not only lived in tenements and raised their families in tenements, they worked in tenements. It was very common for migrants and poor people to work inside their tenement home, sewing goods that then would be picked up at the end of a week by the owner of the clothing factory. Garments and sewing was a common way that migrants and poor folks made money, and the children worked sewing buttons and elaborate parts onto blouses and skirts. So everybody could work in the home. The more pieces you sewed, the more money you could make, which is why even the kids could get involved. I don't know if you've ever sewn before, but imagine holding a needle with your finger and your thumb for hours on hours on hours on hours on end all day long. So this was the kind of work that many migrants could get in the United States. Not all the folks went out to factories, particularly when it came to sewing. Other industries included cigar rolling. It was that was often done by hand and done very much by young folks. Um, Cigarettes were automated. There was actually an invention to automatically roll them in the 1860s. Um, Other things that could be done by migrants usually required them to leave the tenement, and perhaps the father might do that if it was like a factory that he was going to go work in. You can see here the family at work doing the labor that's going to feed them and keep their dreams alive of being in America and what America is going to provide them. We know a lot about tenements because reformers started in the 1890s to document what tenement life was like. And one of the most well known of these reformers is Jacob Riis, who's actually an immigrant from Europe who came to the United States and eventually became a well known um, advocate of reform. He used words and photography in his book, How the Other Half Lives, to show that life in these tenements was dangerous and it was very bad for kids. It corrupted children. So not only do people die of disease and fire in these tenements, but kids growing up are corrupted by tenement life. Here's a picture of Riis, and he is famous for saying, "The slum is the measure of civilization." It's a quote that has always stuck with me. The idea of what we will tolerate as a society in terms of poverty says a lot about how civilized we are. The conditions that we accept for people to live in indicates how civilized we are as people. Many of the wealthy could escape all of this in the cities because city life in the winter in their fantastic mansions was fine. But in the summer, when it got hot and the garbage on the streets started to smell, ooh, who wants to endure that? Who wants to potentially get sick from that? So here's a cartoon laughing at all the wealthy folks. You can see here's a Vanderbilt, William Henry Vanderbilt, escaping town and going to the summer home that he might have in the Hamptons or along the coast where he can enjoy the salt air and escape the nastiness of city life in the summer. Finally, I want to indicate another source of reform for urban life, and that was the social gospel. Reformers in the 1890s began to talk about welfare for the poor and cleaning up the cities to help the poor. And they took a lot of these ideas from Christianity. For example, I've quoted from the Gospel of Matthew here at the bottom. You don't need to write down this quote for the lecture, but it's a pretty significant quote for many of these Christian welfare folks. Then the king will say to those on his right, "Come, you who are blessed by my Father, take your inheritance, the kingdom prepared for you since the creation of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty, and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger, and you invited me in. I needed clothes, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you looked after me. I was in prison, and you came to visit me." So these reformers look at these words and they go, well, if we're going to be Christians, we should help feed the poor. We should provide clothes. We should visit those in jail. We should take care of the sick. Feeding and clothing and helping the poor was what you did to say that you are following Christianity. And of course, you would do that before you can even talk to someone about religion. Um, they're not going to be interested in your Christianity until they get fed and until they have what their basic needs are met. So this social gospel was an emphasis on Christianity in action, helping the poor people on the streets, helping solve the problems of urban life. And it's actually even more than that. The most famous of the social gospel folks actually lived here in Columbus, one of the most famous. His name is the Reverend Washington Gladden. He had a church on Broad Street, and he preached about the needs of the city, all kinds of needs, addressing poverty, addressing corruption. He was particularly critical of alcohol in Columbus and the crime associated with alcohol. He was concerned with relations between workers and owners of factories. He was involved in so much. He was involved in the Columbus School for Girls, actually composed one of their school songs. He is such an important fixture in Columbus life that there is a park, a social justice park, named for him along Broad Street next to the church where he was pastor. So these social gospel folks are very much interested in cleaning up urban areas, addressing the needs of the poor, doing something to help those in need, because it's what Christ would have done. That's the argument that they make.